Hi!
Hello, everyone. Welcome back
Yes.
to Fast.Forward.Pride podcast. We've got something special for you today, a lovely rainbow Christmas.
Well, we talked about it in a podcast about my rainbow trees at home. And this tree was £3.47 at August. So, just before we go into the conversation, we do need to talk about rainbow capitalism. And that even though we are in a very difficult period, I think we also have to recognize that things like this really sends a message to big businesses that we are here and that we exist. So when you see this crap, go out and get it. It really helps.
Absolutely. And of course, we got this from Argos, but there are other retailers available out there. But it is actually a nice segue because this year we saw less of that, kind of rainbow, capitalizing on the rainbow for some quite sad reasons because, the Trump effect and, corporates kind of shying away from turning their logo into a rainbow, which, many of us disagree with the fact that they should do that in the first place. But the fact that they didn't sends a powerful message. And this episode is about that. As we're nearing the end of the year, and we're preparing to celebrate Christmas and Hanukkah and, the festive period with our loved ones, we wanted to kind of look back and think, okay, how was 2025?
Well, in the words of Queen Elizabeth II, it was our annus horribilis.
Oh, no.
And I think, it started off really badly for me in March of this year with the Court of Appeal in Trinidad and Tobago recriminalizing LGBTQ plus people, which was a huge shock. And I don't think people really, grasped how much of a backward step that was for us, and makes my job even more difficult leading up to the Privy Council next year.
For those that maybe have skipped a few episodes and don't know what you're talking about, can you give us a quick summary of what that means? So what happened before the recriminalization?
So in 2017, I challenged the courts of Trinidad and Tobago regarding the Constitution, which had the old British colonial buggery law, which criminalized same-sex intimacy, adult same-sex intimacy with up to 25 years in prison. I won in 2018, and the law was then removed by the courts, and then the Court of Appeal overturned that ruling. So we have three levels of courts that you go through when you're doing a case like this. So High Court, Court of Appeal, and then our Supreme Court is the Privy Council here in London. So next year, my appeal of that judgment comes to the Privy Council, and this will be the first time in history that the Privy Council, which is a British court, let me remind you, it's all old white men that are going to be making the judgment of this. The Privy Council has never heard an LGBT decriminalisation case, even though the majority of countries that criminalise use British colonial-era buggery laws. So this case has huge resonance for millions of people around the world. And I always try to remind people, when we talk about buggery and anal sex, it doesn't just criminalise gay men, it also criminalises heterosexual anal sex as well. So we're talking about sexual freedoms for 45 million people around the world with this judgment. So we're going to be doing a lot of work together, and we have some big announcements coming in the new year. But I think we do have to take stock of how terrible this year has been for LGBTQ plus rights.
Of course, we started with Trump winning and, kind of very quickly seeing the effect of the Trump administration on things like removing LGBT mentions from all official government websites.
Removing trans,
an active campaign, which is really weird because there's a whole movement of gays for Trump, which I can't quite understand,
And even trans for Trumps. We have Caitlyn Jenner who's advocating for Trump. So it
is quite mind-boggling to think that these things are happening while at the same time parts of our community support him as an individual. But point being, this year has really seen a lot of massive setbacks in terms of our rights and our ability to live our queer identity freely and openly. Of course, we talked about the Caribbean, we talked about the US, even here in the UK, a country that many of us have chosen as a safe haven because we felt, in the UK, these things can't happen. We're protected, we've got marriage equality, we've got the Equality Act, there's a fundamental culture of respect here. And yet, in April, the Supreme Court ruled that a trans woman is not a woman. and now we need certificates and all sorts of things to get into toilets. It's ridiculous, right?
Yes.
And again, that the fact that judgment happened in the way that it did is really scary, because it shows the complete. There's society and what we think is right, and then the institutions and how the powers that be operate right now. It feels it's fundamentally disconnected.
Yeah.
And maybe we are to blame.
I think we are to blame, and this is something I've been warning of for a number of years, that LGBT organizations, not just here in the UK, but across the global north, have been focused on heteronormative advocacy. So it's just like, nothing to see here, we're just like straight people. We want to get married and have kids and a pug. And it's just like, no, we had to involve a more diverse idea of what queerness looks like and what family looks like and what gender looks like. And we didn't do that work.
Yeah.
I mean, I think I've said in previous podcasts, Stonewall, the largest LGBTQ plus organization here, did not include trans people when it was founded in 1988. That was a huge mistake. And instead of us holding our hands up and going, okay, this is where we went wrong in the past, and this is how we can fix this and move forward, we just kind of kick grass over our mistakes and don't engage with it. And I think that's a huge strategic mistake, especially for younger queer people who are far more open to figuring out, what their life's journey is, and they have far more options. When I was growing up in the 70s and 80s, you didn't have a choice around being non-binary or other gender identities or pronouns. That was nowhere on my radar. So young people have far more options, and I think we're being held back by the old dinosaurs in my generation.
Yeah, no, I think you're right, and I think it's a really powerful message actually to think about how a whole generation of LGBT activists, we've tried to conform to a certain idea to make our lives more palatable to society, and there's nothing wrong with wanting kids.
Equality is absolutely fine, but what
we've missed out.
Yeah,
we've missed out on the nuances of what our identities can look like, and exactly like you said, we're doing a disservice to the younger generations coming through. Majority of which, if you look at the latest kind of studies done even by the ONS and things like this, over 50% of under 25 identify as something else than heterosexual, both in terms of sexual orientation and gender identity, in that spectrum of non-binary, trans, and all of it. So we are doing a disservice to the future generation, not tapping into that nuance of our identity. And what the court ruling shows is exactly that, that we are not accepting a definition of a woman that goes beyond the stereotypical idea that we've pushed of,
exactly.
biological.
I mean, when you look at the murder of Charlie Kirk, it's now kind of reported, allegedly, he was subscribed to an OnlyFans of a trans woman. If you look at the interview of Nick Fuentes, another right-wing, young, awful voice, he was asked directly by Piers Morgan, if he was gay, and the hesitation in his voice. And again, these young people, when they go into that right-wing world, we don't give them any embrace. So I think we have to look at how do we embrace people who are on the spectrum of gender and sexual orientation, because that spectrum has always been very narrowly defined by colonialism, by Europeans, by enslavement, all of those things, and it's been like you have only two choices. You're either straight or gay. You're either male or female. And when you look at those people, what drives them into this right-wing belief and this idea that they can't be anything else has been us buying into that binary. So when you look at, for example, in the trans movement, there's very little movement around stepping away from the binary idea. So, you have these very famous trans women predominantly who will transition and then do everything that they can to ignore their journey through the gender, and that lack of the journey and the process and everything that goes with it, and the learning that you have. Because for me, I think trans people are the most fascinating people. I think they're like astronauts. They are on a completely different journey to us in the general population. That is so important to share and to broaden the conversation, and we're not having those conversations. effectively, especially with our siblings in the right wing, who are drawn to this idea of belonging because they can't find their own voice in a spectrum that we're not giving them. So we, particularly my age group, I keep calling us dinosaurs. We have to get over this. The future does belong to young queer people. And if you're uncomfortable with the word queer, fine. But let younger people identify as they see fit. Let them take that journey and let them make their own mistakes and figure out what the journey is for themselves. But we have to stop enforcing our preconceived ideas, because a lot of these ideas were so...
Yeah, but I mean, there's a lesson on both sides here, I think, because whilst the older generations, and many of whom are still in a position of power and influence, need to open up to ideas that are more nuanced in terms of identity, and listen to the younger generation. Yeah. What younger generations can learn from the old guard is the activism. You may have been a little bit more restricted in your concepts of what you considered, in sexual orientation and gender identity, but you were out there trying to fight for your rights. And I think everything, we started the episode talking about how bad this year has been, for us in the LGBTQ plus community. But part of that has to be because many of the younger generations are less vocal and less engaged. We've allowed these things to happen, and we need to reclaim our space in the activism space, whatever that looks like. It can be social media, sharing content, it can be talking to someone when they are displaying slightly homophobic, sort of thoughts, even when they are loved ones, family members and friends, speaking out, calling out those kind of, stereotypical views or homophobic banter, all of that is a form of activism. Yeah. And maybe if that, that can be a bit of a call to action from this episode, is that 2025 has been quite bad, and I'll come to you to see what your kind of final thoughts are. But 2025 has been really bad across, the pond, US, UK, in Europe. We haven't even touched,
there are rollbacks everywhere.
And we can't be complacent, especially younger people. You need to figure out what being an activist mean to you, but do something. Have a conversation. This whole podcast, the premise is about giving you some content so that you can have a conversation with someone else. Please do, because otherwise we'll keep seeing, Trump, the next one might be Farage, and again, I see a lot of my friends saying, oh, well, if that happens, I might have to move away from the UK. No, fight. This is your home. Don't allow people like Farage, to get to power in the first place and take away our rights. So I think it's that kind of, almost defeated position that we start from thinking, oh, what can I do? As one person, what difference can I make? Your case has demonstrated that one person can make a difference. So I guess as we near the end of this episode, what would be your final thought, your final words in terms of from this annus horribilis, how do we move forward?
I think I really want to empower people to feel that they can make a difference, because I think that's where the stop happens. Nobody taught me in school that you can take your country to court. Now, I'm not a lawyer. I dropped out of university. I don't have any paperwork that gave me the, power to do this. I just got up one day really angry and said, right, something needs to happen and someone needs to do something. And then I decided, right, I'm someone. So I think the power of self is what we don't imbue. And, what you need to do is, number one, look in your community, see what's missing. If you don't have people in your inner circle who look different to you, who come from a different background, who have a different life experience, then, go and find them. Go and find them and hear their stories.
Thank you so much, Jason, for your wise words as always. We are at the end of the episode. We will see you next week with some reflections on the future, having done the past today. But as always, we'd love to hear your thoughts. So if you want to reach out, you can, of course, comment under the episode or send us an email at Fast.Forward.Pride@gmail.com.
That's the one.
Thank you so much. And we'll see you all next time. And thank you again for bringing the beautiful rainbow Christmas tree. If you are in the UK and want to grab one before it's too late, please go and find them.
Yes.
But thank you again and see you next time.
Bye.